Microsoft had started to make a name for itself in the video gaming industry with its original Xbox, but it still faced some challenges competing with the long-entrenched players of Sony and Nintendo. But for its next console, they decided to tap into its wealth of knowledge in the PC industry to come out with what would arguably be their best console, or, if not their best, the console that finally made them a major player and brought in innovations that would help shape video gaming's future. We're talking about the Xbox 360. So join us as we head back 20 years and talk about this memorable console next on Downloadable Content. Welcome to Season 12 of Downloadable Content, the DLC podcast. I am your host, Brian, and with me we have Veronica.
Hello.
And we have Spencer.
Howdy.
Welcome, welcome. It's the start of a fresh new season. Back to where it all began.
I can smell the new season smell.
Different from the new car smell. But
I mean, similar enough.
Similar enough, but feels comfy and cozy. Like a nice pair of pants that just fit you so well. You know, that sort of thing.
What's that smell of burning? Oh no, it's the Xbox 360's Red Ring of Death.
Oh, already. I was waiting until someone mentioned the Red Ring, and it only took 2 minutes. Well done. Well done.
I mean, to be fair, when it comes to the 360, I came to it way later. I bought one years afterwards when it was no longer a current generation, so my familiarity with it when it was new was the whole controversy of the Red Ring of Death and everything that went along with it.
Yes, and we are going to dive into that. But first, before we do, I want to remind every one of you out there on the wide world of the internet that every single episode, all 11 plus years worth, all 180, this is 189 episodes now, can be found on the website dlcpodcast.com, and it can also be found on YouTube, iTunes, or as they now call it, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Stitcher has unfortunately long since died, so womp womp.
Much like the Xbox console market.
Hey! Hey, there we go. But yes, every single episode can be found on those places, all the different ways to get downloadable content into your ears.
It's funny, I feel like we're gonna poke at the 360 quite a few times in this episode, but if it was in any other generation that didn't have the Wii, it would have beaten almost anything else. Like, it did phenomenal.
Yes, sales-wise, it did great. The only problem is that the only reason why it was not the best-selling console of that generation was because of the Wii. So
it's the whole thing of either of these, like, both of them are two of the best-selling consoles of all time, and we just happen to get two of them in the same generation.
Yeah, and and it's so, and because we're trying to compete with the PS3, which stumbled very much out of the gate, but
$600 console? What are you talking about?
What do you mean? What do you mean? And at $600 console. Oh, and we promised backwards compatibility only to take it away almost immediately. But anyway,
what console? They sold PS3s. I thought it was just a rumor.
I know. So, But we go all the way back to November 2005 when the Xbox 360 came out. It was November 22nd, 3 days after my 20th birthday. It came out. And it came out for the low price of $400, which was a lot of money back now. And it was, and like you, Ronnie, I did not get the console at launch. I did not get the 360 until way late in its life cycle because, so my philosophy for buying consoles has always been, I will buy the console when the number of games for that console exceed the cost of the console, which means I'm not buying a console for 1 or 2 games.
That is a very... You're the first person I've heard with that metric. That is a very fair metric.
That is a metric I stole from my good friend Ben, and I'm like, you know what? That's a really, really good sound metric. I mean, it's something I'd always done, without really thinking about it. I've almost never bought a console at launch. I've always waited until there were a few games.
My metric is it a Nintendo handheld? If it is, pick it up at launch. Otherwise, wait until it goes on sale.
Wait until it goes on sale. Wait until everyone has broken it.
It's funny. I picked up my 360 when we knew what the major issues that caused the Red Ring of Death were. So I picked up one for $30 that was bricked. And all it had was the heating issue. I just had to go in. I replaced the X bracket with actual screws, and it worked fine. I spent $30 to get my 360.
Very nice. I got it for $0. I got it as a gift one birthday or Christmas, like in 2010, 2011. So, way after all of those issues with the Red Ring of Death resolved. But I remember, because I had no interest in getting the original Xbox. Not a one. I still, to this day, never owned one. It just never appealed to me. Basically, we were in that era where platform exclusives were really starting to go the way of the dodo. And so, like, every game basically any game that I wanted that came out for the original Xbox eventually made its way to PlayStation. So, and
it's a thing, because, like, my familiarity with Xbox was primarily because my wife, at the time, my girlfriend, her family did PlayStation for PS1, but they loved the Oddworld series, and Oddworld jumped ship to Xbox. So they went from the PlayStation 1 to the Xbox instead and missed the PS2. So most of the games and stuff I was familiar with from the original were from, like, being over her house.
Yeah, I can see that. And,
So mainly Stranger's Wrath.
Yeah. I mean, I know, Spencer, you and your lovely currently own my old Xbox 360, but did you have any play with it beforehand?
Oh, yeah. So, like, you guys are pretty much the opposite of me, and it's funny because, we're talking off air about how you guys you succumb to the Steam sales and, like, just victim of the moment kind of purchases, and it gives you this giant backlog. But you're very prudent about your console purchases and allowing the backlog to fill up before you go and get it. I'm probably the exact opposite, in such that if there's a specific title that's coming out, I want the system for that title. This has gone pretty much my entire lifespan of my ability to purchase consoles. Like, obviously, when I was a kid and getting stuff all for free, quote unquote, theoretically, that was completely different, and we'd be getting consoles on launch, like Super Nintendo, Game Boy, the NES we got in, like, 88 when it became more available outside of, like, major cities. But for the 360 specifically, I got it to play Soul Calibur 4. Because of the issue, like, at that point, the PS3 was, like, still pretty expensive, and it wasn't looking like I was gonna be able to afford one, even if I could find one. But the 360 at that point was still like well into the marketplace, and it was hard to find one. And the Red Ring in 2008 had been basically like smoothed out to the point where if you're buying a new system, you'd feel comfortable enough that you probably won't deal with anything within the first couple of years. And the first one I bought, the black model, I forget their nomenclature for how that breaks down, but that model was fine, and I eventually replaced it with the Gears 3 edition Xbox 360 when Gears 3 came out, and that was a mainstay that I actually am using these days to play Gears 1 over to try and beat it on Insane.
Yeah, like I think you're talking about like originally when it came out, there were two flavors of it. There was the core, which was actually $300, and then the premium one that had the bigger hard drive was $400. So then I think there was a slim version, or one that was called the arcade version, and then the last one, the last version was I think called the Elite.
That would be correct.
And with each successive version, like the hard drives got bigger and bigger, because this system was built with sort of like PC ideas in mind. Like at this point, like for me personally, like I had not dabbled in PC gaming yet. I was still at this point exclusively a console gamer. So what finally made me want to get this system, because again, I had no interest in the original Xbox, but I was exposed to playing it largely through my good friend Wyatt. I'd go to his place and he would show me games that he got on Xbox Live, like Battle Block Theater, which is one of those zaniest platformers I've ever played.
I still remember the first time you showed me that game. Holy crap.
Yeah, there was my introduction to like the online multiplayer game, the MOBA game called Happy Wars, which was hilarious, and Iron Brigade, which was another one, and ultimately what finally tipped me into wanting the console was Mass Effect, because the first Mass Effect game at the time was a 360 exclusive. Like, it came out 2 years after the launch of the 360, and it was on Xbox 360 only for 5 years. It did not make the jump to PS3 until 2012. So that was the tipping point.
Still actually like mattered.
Yes, like console exclusivity was on the downswing, but there were some games that still had that, and this was one of them. Like, when it came out, it was published directly through Microsoft Game Studios, and I had seen the game and I had really, really wanted to play it, and I did not want it. I was like, I didn't know if it was going to ever come out on PS3. It did, obviously, years later, but that was the game that finally tipped it for me, and then to a lesser extent, Skyrim.
I don't think I realized that Skyrim was originally a 360 exclusive.
Well, yeah, when it comes out on literally every system, you just kind of forget where it started. It's kind of like RE4.
Yeah.
Now no one remembers that it was a GameCube game at first.
I was looking up earlier lists of Xbox exclusives to remind myself, because it's been so long, and it is so hard to find out what was exclusive at the time, because so much has been ported since then, because so many of the games were so incredibly popular that the companies weren't going to just leave them on the 360. Like, like Skyrim.
Skyrim was not an Xbox 360 exclusive. It came out for PC, PS3, and 360 on the same day, November 11th, 2011. But the from all reviews and fans, the Xbox 360 version of the game was the best version. So that's the version I wound up getting. So
I was gonna say, what had made me want a 360 was, first of all, the Fable series, but Fable 2, and Lost Odyssey, because I'm an RPG gamer. So of course the thing that attracts me there are like the 6 RPGs they had on the system.
yeah, speaking of games that have never seen the light of day since, Lost Odyssey. Like, you just mentioned that, there have been developers who have just ported so many of those 360 games forward. That one ain't.
Yeah, and then there's Lost Odyssey, which is quite appropriately lost.
Like, there are times when I want to buy an Xbox 360 again just to replay that game. But no!
You can always come over.
I
You
could.
just have to, drop a kidney's worth of dollary dues to pick it up.
Yeah, just find the game. Like, Spencer, can I play my old 360 again?
I was gonna say, also the Lost Katamari game, beautiful Katamari, the only one of them that released not on a PlayStation console, so it's the one that a bunch of people have never played.
Did that not make it to Switch?
Don't believe so.
Dang.
I'll Google it real quick.
So I know my
360.
Nice. Get wrecked. Yep. What are you gonna do? Yeah, it's just one of those franchises that's like popular, but only in a niche way.
Absolutely. It was trying to expand itself out. It's kind of like Katamari being on 360 is kind of like Lost Odyssey and a couple other of RPGs, where they were trying to expand outwards into a different market, and it just did not land in that market.
Yeah, let's not forget Blue Dragon, also another one of those RPGs of like a lot of them. It seemed like, if I remember correctly, that some of the bigger RPG houses like Square Enix, sized houses had their upper echelon developers, go off and make their own companies, and then Xbox 360 at the time was like, hey, why don't you come over and make it on our system so that we can have some established RPGs for the system that draws people in. And, didn't really work out the way they wanted it to, but it at least gave people at the time the opportunity to play some new and interesting stuff.
I mean, it didn't work out the way the companies wanted it to, and it didn't work out the way that Microsoft wanted it to, because they weren't super concerned about RPGs specifically. The whole point of trying to get RPGs on the 360 was because they were trying to make inroads in the Japanese market. Like, a bunch of decisions they made on the 360, including the hourglass shape of the console, those were all specifically to try to get into the Japanese market, and it didn't work.
I think to this day, Microsoft has kind of considered the Japanese market a lost cause at this point. Like, they have just never have been able to make those inroads, no matter how hard they try. Like, Sony and Nintendo are just too firmly entrenched. But
they tried again in the Xbox One era, but I feel like the hardest they pushed in Japan was during the 360.
Yeah, and oh, by the way, Lost Odyssey and Blue Dragon, both made by Mistwalker. Both games haven't seen the light of day since the 360. So,
I think Blue Dragon's probably a little bit easier to get a hold of than Lost Odyssey. But yeah, definitely same. I don't know if the exact same team, but yeah, same production house.
Well, definitely same writer and composer. But yeah, like, so have we all played Lost Odyssey?
No, I didn't. That was one I just never got around to.
You never got around to.
My 360 was a Gears machine and a Soul Calibur machine for like the majority of the time. And then, like Red Dead Redemption came out and that ate up like a year of my life, and Alan Wake came out and that ate up another year of my life. So there's some good ones in between, but if I had like a Steam-esque style, like you've played this many hours of this game, it would be like something along those lines for sure, where Soul Calibur 4 and all the Gears games, 3 more mostly, but all the Gears games get a lot of time.
Just ate your soul alive.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of Nasher shots fired in that 360.
So I definitely did play Lost Odyssey, though I'd never completed it.
Okay, so you may or may not have had the fun experience I had with Lost Odyssey. Did you ever experience the disc 4 fuckery? So
remember.
Okay.
What happened?
Lost Odyssey was one of those very, very rare Xbox games that were multiple discs, and this game was 4 discs. And there was some sort of a production error in this game, like manufacturing error in the disc. When you got to disc 4, for some unknown, well, it's a known reason now, but then it was like you pop in, it says, please insert disc 4, and for whatever reason the console would just not be able to read it. It would not pick up the disc at all. It would just say, you can't read the disc, or disc read error, or something like that. And this apparently was a very common issue with like its first production run. Like checking the internet at the time, like this was apparently an established problem that players would get to disc 4 of this game and the console would just not be able to read the disc. And it's like, okay, well, fuck, I've sank in, dozens of hours already. This game is brand new. It's a spotless disc. Why isn't the console reading the disc? And it turns out that apparently in the manufacture of disc 4 specifically, there was some sort of invisible coating on the disc that prevented the system from being able to read the disc. So the way you fixed this was by boiling the disc. You put the disc. I don't know who figured this out, but as I'm reading how people are fixing this, I'm going,
somebody making a meme figured it out.
Probably. And much like in the same way we were talking off air about how speedrunners figure out where the hell they find the time to figure out the most crazy ways to break a damn game. But like somebody figured this out, that if you put the disc 4 of Lost Odyssey in boiling water for a few minutes, it will boil away the invisible coating, and the game will be able, the console will be able to read the disc. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, this can't, what the hell do you mean? Like, this can't possibly work. But I'm like, you know what? The console can't read the disc. It's 1 a.m. This game has my soul. Fine. So I'm in the kitchen, I boil up a pot of water, and and I put the disc in a strainer because you don't want it to touch the bottom of the pot, and I just let the thing boil for like 5 minutes. And I take it out, I pat it dry, all that fun stuff, let it cool down, I pop the disc back in, and motherfucker, it starts working. I'm going, what the fuck? Is boiling a disc the new blowing in the cartridge? Like,
that's hilarious.
Yeah, I'm looking at the internet like it's okay, someone's clearly having a joke here. Who the fuck?
They obviously got pissed and decided they were going to destroy their disc, and they threw it in boiling water, and then they're like, let's try it again.
Yeah, like I'm thinking like this is some shit poster or something, and no, it fucking worked, and I played the rest of the game and I loved it. But I'm like, That is my lingering memory of Lost Odyssey specifically. It remains to this day the only game that I've had to boil to get it to work.
That's awful.
I mean, I don't think boiling your cartridge games would be super effective.
Well, no, that's what I said. Is boiling the disc the new blowing the cartridge? It's like, what voodoo?
What voodoo do you do?
Basically, but oh man, but it was.
So, do you have an idea of which direction we want to go with this conversation?
I was going to shift over to just Xbox Live. Xbox Live in particular, because we had online connectivity, online multiplayer. The PS3, I believe, was capable of some of that. You could hook it up to your, you could connect to your router wirelessly, or you could plug in an Ethernet cable to it. But I feel like the Xbox 360 really, really made online gaming just take the fuck off. Like, it seemed like every one of my gamer friends had an Xbox Live username, a gamer score. It was like this was the generation which, at least from my own experience, where getting online and playing with friends really, really took off.
It also helped too that that was kind of the point where the internet itself became more accessible as like a financial option versus, obviously it had evolved past dial-up long before that, but it was still in that infancy period where people didn't really know what to get, like what service to have. So, the timing of the convenience of how the 360's marketplace worked in conjunction with the fact that the internet was just becoming more accessible and easier to use for the average person definitely gave just like an opportunity that everyone took advantage of, it seemed like.
And you're exactly right. And to further that, it just seemed like the online gaming community, this was finally something that was no longer confined exclusively to PC gaming. This was the domain of, the PC master race, etc., etc. But with Xbox Live, you had cross-game chat. It was basically its own social network. There seemed to be new indie games dropping daily, or weekly, and in addition, the 360 itself, when games did get released cross-platform, it seemed like the 360 versions of all of those games were consistently the best versions of those games. But I just remember how many of my friends were on Xbox Live constantly. It was the place to be if you wanted to play games online.
I think it's important also to note that part of the reason why the Xbox versions were usually better than the PS3 versions was because the PS3 was so hard to develop for that companies usually just couldn't figure out the right way to make it work on the PS3, so they just kind of are like, let's just cobble together something so we can get it out, and then hopefully, people will still buy it and it won't be that bad.
Yeah, and not to mention that, as developers are making these games, they're largely making them on PCs anyway. And when you have a console that is with that mentality in mind, with that PC gaming mentality in mind, because it's Microsoft, you could get away with doing that. If I remember correctly, the hardware itself made it was that, especially in the later versions of the 360, there were games that you could play in 60 FPS, whereas PS3 it was always 30. So if you were somebody that viewed graphics, they placed the priority on graphics, the 360 was the way to go if you didn't have just a straight PC. Like,
I was gonna say, I can tell you, for me, I'm not gonna have a lot to add to this conversation because I don't play games online. So, with one exception, which was not on the 360. So, you guys have fun.
you have fun, enjoy. But no, like, I remember the hours I was playing with friends playing Happy Wars. It was just it was a funny little like tower defense game.
It also allowed for the expansion of fighting games to be able to be something that you would play at home versus other people online, rather than having to go to dying arcades to get what you want, or something along the lines of like just having to have people over to play over to your place, or like bringing a bunch of consoles and having like a LAN style tournament. It really started the foundation for what esports was going to be.
Yes, very much so. Like, you could do either or. Like, you could do like the old fashioned way of getting having a bunch of friends over, but it was easier to just get online. If you had an Xbox Gold subscription, you could do all that. And with the Xbox Live, you had your own friends lists. You could do that. You could do all that, and it also meant that overhead for developers theoretically would have decreased, because since as you mentioned, Spencer, like here we have gaming really starting to take advantage of the capabilities of the internet, which is something Nintendo still struggles with. But internet, what's that? Says Nintendo. But since you were saying like gaming really starting to embrace the internet at this time, it also meant that digital distribution was becoming a lot more of a thing. Yeah, I know. Boo for those of us who really still enjoy having physical media, but also
people who like to play their games at any point after they bought it, rather than being like, oh well, the publishers decided to take this offline and now you don't get to have it.
Yeah, we're definitely in agreement there, and that is definitely a rant right there. But because of digital distribution, it also meant that Xbox 360 was very, very indie dev friendly. Like, you have so many indie devs that could not afford to. They didn't have the money to pay for a physical print run of their games. So with digital distribution, it meant that they could get these games out and make some coin, and hopefully if the demand was there and they had some money, they could do a limited print run. And this is where limited run games makes their bucks. Yes, it does have the disadvantage that if the game exists only on one storefront, then when that storefront goes bye-bye, then so goes the game. But I think you'll agree that because digital distribution became viable, it meant that we got a lot of really, really good indie games out there as a result.
It was one of the definitive dual-edged swords moments of the gaming industry, because it allowed for the indie market to explode in a way that was never the case beforehand. Like, before the Xbox Marketplace became a known function for indie developers, you were literally just like handing out like USB sticks of your game to people at like functions and stuff like that, being like, "Here, try my game out." And then it's basically a game of digital telephone where you played the game and then you let your friend play the game and stuff like that, and it's just not a marketable way for an indie developer to like make any sort of actual money. And like you said, being able to avoid the physical purchase problem that a low value company or just like a singular person making a game has, just expanded that opportunity avenue immensely. But at the same time, it allowed for the bigger dev companies to kind of abuse that system, and now we're in that place where there's not enough regulation on ownership of a game once purchased, and it makes it very hard to be confident that if you buy a digital game, you're going to be able to continue to access it later on.
Yes.
I was gonna say, it also solved the piracy problem that you would see in the PC space of just being able to copy the CDs or the discs or anything else, or just being able to share the actual physical programs on our computers. By doing it on the console and linking it to your account, you can bypass that whole thing while still keeping the benefits of, you know, distributing it digitally.
And like, for me personally, like one of my favorite video games in the last 20 years initially launched via Xbox Live, Bastion from Supergiant Games.
You're gonna say that.
Like, that was, like, I remember going to PAX East, my first PAX East in 2011, and I just remember the booth that Supergiant had, which, you know, it wasn't a particularly big booth, but they were showing, and because it was such a small studio, like, you had, like, the voice cast, which was, I think, just one. It was Logan Cunningham, because it was just the narrator. You had Darren Korb, the composer. You had some of the developers and programmers there. But yeah, this was... I remember those days, Spencer, of like those early PAX Easts where, like, if the indie devs, like, they were all either giving demos away on flash disks or, like, giving codes. Like, you know, find our game on Xbox Live, or back when Steam had the Steam Greenlight program, you know, please vote for this game, and you know, please let the light of Gabe Newell shine on us so we can release this game on Steam. Like, but some of my favorite video games in the last 15-20 years got their start because they were allowed to release their games digitally and not having that barrier of needing to have a print run. You know, that fine double-edged sword analogy, perfectly accurate, but like, we got some really, really great games that got their start because of Xbox Live.
Oh, for sure. The negatives don't come to fruition until, you know, like this
now.
Gen, you know, this current gen and forward. But you can't ignore that influence eventually taking hold.
Yes.
This is where it starts.
This is where it starts. It starts off with a lot of promise, and then, you know, it gets abused.
Kind of like the Xbox 360's lifespan.
In what way?
Once the PS3 became actually available, its sales started to jump in a way that Xbox didn't get to match. And while Xbox was dinking around with Kinect and doing all that dumbass stuff that eventually cratered their console sales in future generations, Sony was finally acquiring third-party titles that were exclusive but worth playing, like, you know, the beginning of the end in the sense of all the Souls games that have flooded the market and drowned the gaming conversation started out on the PS3 and in the later years of its life.
Also, as much as we talk about the 360 and indie games early in its life, the PS3 kind of took the title as the indie game platform towards the end of that generation.
Yes, once Sony finally figured out, you know, because I remember very much how Sony struggled for quite a few years out of the gate. And so it opened the door, but you are right. Like eventually, Sony reasserted itself and became the dominant console toward the end.
I mean, if we ignore the one that the two of us that we're all kind of talking around right now, which was the effect the Wii had on the 360 and the PlayStation, because when we mentioned the Kinect, there's a reason they were trying to make that work.
Oh yeah,
Sony did the same thing with their Move nonsense.
Oh, that's right.
Sex dongles there.
Oh, that's right. But, the PlayStation Snow Cone. That's right.
Yeah. So I think it's just that gen was the Wii and then Xbox versus PlayStation. Like the Nintendo was on its own just launch platform that was so far beyond what the 360 and the PS3 could touch in terms of like just the audience that they captured, that the Xbox and the 360 being like capital G gamer systems like were never like even thinking about trying to cater to until it was just so far beyond the point of late that it's laughable that they attempted to do something.
Yeah, like I remember I never owned a Kinect. But yes, like Ronnie, you do bring up an excellent point because I mean, as far as whatever your preferences and your opinions are, your likes and dislikes regarding the three consoles of that generation, just by pure sales, the Wii was the winner. And yeah, I remember the Kinect.
Hilarious, because in any other generation, the 360 would have just decimated.
Yes.
And we just got, like I said earlier, two of the best-selling consoles going to head-to-head, and the 360 couldn't match up to the Wii, but it could have matched up to basically anything else.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad, because Xbox has had a couple chances of being the top console of its generation, but it just keeps kind of getting knocked down at the last minute.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. Like, and it just motion controls were in for that generation, and then we just kind of fizzle away. But it's like I remember, the only time I ever saw the Kinect being used in any sort of, fun gaming context were like the dance games. Like I remember whether it was DDR or Just Dance or whatever, those series, just because I remember seeing those at PAX. PAX East has always had a dance stage, and like that was basically it's the only time I ever really saw it, and the Kinect didn't take off as well. It was so obvious that the Kinect and the PlayStation rainbow vibrator thing, they were very, very obviously we're outright yoinking this idea from Nintendo and making it just different enough so that we don't get sued out of existence. But Nintendo was always going to win that one.
Well, that's because they actually understood, as usual, because this is like, for all the flaws Nintendo has, like, this is something they've understood since the dawn of the Nintendo era. They know that how to make the consoles and the games for the console. So, like, their console has a theme, and their games match the theme of the console. And that tracks all the way from the NES to now with the Switch. Like, they have an unspeakable ability to advertise their systems by having games that are not only are classic games for their era and sometimes all time, but they meld the system's abilities so well that you actually want to use them rather than just having it being just a generic console, like as you think of the PS consoles and the Xbox consoles.
Mm-hmm.
They make games that couldn't be done elsewhere to sell their gimmick as not a gimmick, but just what this console is.
Yeah, that's why I don't like it being called a gimmick, because it's successful, and like gimmick implies that it's a cheap money grab.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Nintendo has had gimmicks. Let's not, you know, the Wii U, LOL, Virtual Boy, LOL, but a lot of the time it's like them being forward thinking and being like, how can we advance the industry as a whole rather than just staying stagnant and keep doing the same thing, which is kind of leading us to where we are in the industry right now.
Yeah.
Where like Nintendo's doing shit that's interesting and new. Meanwhile, Xbox and PlayStation are getting so stagnant that you wonder if the next console generation's even going to exist outside of like Steam Deck / Switch style handheld console hybrids.
Like it's interesting to see where they're gonna go in the future, but I mean, we you know, it was very obvious that after this generation had ended, motion controls kind of by and large went quietly away in future generations. Like Nintendo still holds on to them, and I know that the controllers for our current systems, you know, they now have sort of like gyroscopic sensors and whatnot. You know, and you get haptic feedback and all of that, but like full body motion after this generation went away. And
well, yes and no, because basically how I see it is that technology was branched, and as you said, like the controllers picked up like the gyroscope and the microphone being in the controller and haptic and all the feedbacks kind of things, but then VR has assembled the motion part of it and is using that in ways to make the VR systems much more usable and user-friendly in terms of size and shape, instead of having like big clunky giant headsets and, you know, like huge ham-fisted controller schemes. Like it's becoming much more of usable and functionable technology that will not at the current time, but it seems almost inevitable that there is going to be a VR console that rivals like the top tier consoles of the market. There just needs to be like a development push that actually makes quality VR games that are unique to VR and aren't just like how 70% of the Wii motion games were, where it was just like, here's this interesting feature that really only is fun for 10 minutes, but we're gonna make a like $10 game out of it, and you're gonna buy it because you have a Wii.
And you know, I'm glad you mentioned that, you know, that VR and, you know, how the motion controls of the Wii, the PS3, and the Kinect from the 360 have led to this point, because VR games, I get motion sickness so easily that if I play a VR game, I will puke in about 5 minutes. So it's
that's why they gotta offer the bucket and bag attachment to the helmet, so you could just puke into the bucket and then it just automatically ties the bag and drops it on the floor for you.
There you go.
Just keep
there you
on
go.
gaming.
Yep, just keep on going. All right, I can do this.
I was gonna say the motion controls of this generation have never gone away. They've just evolved into other things. That's all that
Yeah,
they have.
yeah.
I see it a lot like the QTE thing, where like for 3 or 4 years, every fucking game had QTEs, whether it made sense or not. And then eventually everyone got sick of them, so developers started to push away. And you only see QTEs now in a relatively appropriate scenarios that aren't like an entire game focused around that concept, but more of just like, here's a specific thing. Like, for example, the Spider-Man game, the first Insomniac one, when you would like have to stop a car that's moving and Peter's like pushing into it with his feet, you like mash A for that part to slow it down faster. That kind of stuff kind of still permeates in, but it isn't like the entire game isn't you like doing cutscenes as Spider-Man. And that's, I feel like that's the same with all of the motion control Wii era stuff. Is like you only see it now baked in a way that makes real sense, like in Breath of the Wild, where like moving the controller as like a gyroscope helps you aim better when you're shooting the bow.
Yes.
I was gonna say gyro aiming has made things so much better for me in games.
I can imagine. I mean, there's a lot of us that, you know, and I because I still play games on my older consoles, and just like going back to tank controls, and I'm just like, oh dear God, how did I ever manage?
It's why I'm glad that we got the Resident Evil remakes, because, dear God, the tank controls, I can still go back to them, but I do not enjoy them as much.
Like, oh man. So
I'm an outlier here. I just appreciate them because they were made in an era where that stuff didn't exist, and I try not to be like, oh well, it's bad now because this technology exists, or this, you know, dev technology exists, or this game consists, you know, like whatever specific thing you're talking about. For me, it's easy to like compartmentalize it to the point where it's like, okay, tank controls are fine in this era because the games were designed around tank controls, and while they're a little unwieldy in comparison to newer versions of games, it's still quality. It's just not.
Oh yeah,
you would never play it now. Like, you would never institute it now in a technology for like a newer game, unless you're like an indie dev and want to do some sort of like homage style game or satire.
Absolutely.
In another way that you and I are polar opposites, in that you can compartmentalize and you know, experience a game as it was at the time without letting newer stuff color it. Meanwhile, for me, it doesn't matter when a game was released. I have to judge it based off my experiences now. And if that means I enjoy it less now, then I enjoy it less now. I would be lying to myself otherwise. And I can't do that.
And yeah, like, I tend to lean a little bit more toward Spencer, but it's a reminder. Like, we're talking about, you know, these controls. Like, I just recently acquired again the originals. I bought the cartridge, the original Super Smash Brothers for my N64, and when I was playing it, and I'm going, because now I am so used to current Smash Brothers controls. They are streamlined, they are smooth, they are flawless. Going back to an N64 controller, I'm just like, oh my God, my hands are screaming. What the? But, you know, eventually muscle memory takes over, and it's like, oh yeah, right. Now this is how I do this. But it's just like, for a good like half hours, I'm getting like, especially when I'm playing, you do those mini games in the original Smash Bros, like board the platforms or break the targets. Like, I'm thinking, oh my God, who the hell fucking thought this was good controller design? All right, I think we're at a good stopping point here for the end of our first half. So in the second half, we'll talk about some more games. We'll talk about its good, strong, and first and third party support, and we will talk about more of the groundwork that the console laid for gaming today. So with that, we'll take a short break. You are listening to the DLC podcast as we talk 20 years of the Xbox 360. We'll be back. Welcome back to the second half of our DLC podcast, talking about the Xbox 360 as it hits its 20th anniversary. We're all still here. We have all not gone out. Our lives have not been sucked back into Mass Effect or Red Rings of Death or what have you. So,
Yay.
yeah, hooray! So, I think we're going to start this second half. We mentioned it in the first half. We talked about the aforementioned Red Ring of Death, which, you know, for all of the positives and that we have spoken of over the 360, you know, you can't really talk about the Xbox 360's history, really, without bringing up the Red Ring of Death. So because this was something I never personally experienced in my brief Xbox 360 ownership, Ronnie, I'll let you open the bidding here.
Well, I think the first thing, it's important to recognize why the Red Ring of Death happened, and it was kind of two different issues. One, they decided on the shape of the system before they finalized the internals of it, because they wanted a specific shape that they had decided was going to sell better in Japan. And then they just kind of shoved everything into that shape and tried to make it work. And it was significantly smaller than it probably needed to be.
Oops.
Which caused a bunch of heating issues. But two, and here's the thing a lot of people don't realize, the Xbox 360's failure rate in the factory was 68%.
Holy shit, I did not know that.
Only 32% were a proper yield that they sold, and they started just selling those. And then they had shortages because everyone wanted it, and they went back to those defective consoles, tested them, and basically went, okay, these are outside of spec, but they are running. Release them to the public.
Oh, I did not know that. So Microsoft knowingly released defective systems. Wow.
Well, I will say, not necessarily defective. They were ones that were out of spec. So they had issues that were known, but they weren't necessarily, like, were they going to fail? I mean, ultimately, we know the answer is yes, they did. But at the time, like, I think they just went, these are going to have a higher chance of something happening, but they didn't release them knowing what was going to happen. They just knew, we have more than half of our consoles are sitting in warehouses right now that we can't sell because they have issues, and we have people who need to buy them. And that was why that first push of Xbox had such a high failure rate compared to the next set that came afterwards. Because, like, you have three main things here. You have the initial release, then you had the second run. The second run that they did hold back the ones that were out of spec. So that right there cut the failure rate down in, like, half. You were still getting Red Rings of Death, but it was way less often. And then they actually re-engineered the internals, and that's when you got the one that we're most familiar, the ones that are to this day are still running, where they switched out some parts for smaller parts. They kind of switched how things were on the inside to solve a lot of these issues. But yeah, the initial failure rate of that first set, I mean, I won't even say the first setup, it was actually higher than this. The average failure rate for the 360 over its lifespan was 54%. And that's counting the ones that were after they fixed the issues. So that initial release, I can't find an actual number from the time, but it's got to be 70 or 80% for that first release.
Jeez.
Console failure rate.
And that is what happens when you decide on a cover before the innards.
Yep.
Well done. Well done, everybody. Good design practice.
I mean, Microsoft being not really known for hardware development, it makes sense that they would make errors like this. You know, they've been a software company from the jump, so you know it's not excused, but it's understandable that they would make these kind of errors when Sony and Nintendo, you know, are both much more experienced at this point in the generational lifetimes of each company involved in video games with the hardware construction, design, QAing, all that stuff.
And they did not realize, they were confident going into 360. They didn't realize the lightning in a bottle they had, and they were selling out all over the place, and that's why they released that defective batch, because they needed to fill shelves, and they basically just went, well, we'll deal with the fallout, we'll deal with what happened.
And they did. Like they were a meme for a while. Like,
oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
Like, I don't. Since I never experienced this, like, I don't remember what the fix was or what was causing those red rings of death. Was it just overheating?
Okay. There's about, I believe they narrowed it down to 8 completely different issues that can cause the red ring of death.
Oh, good.
All of which could be wrong. The most common was a heating issue where they have an X bracket that I don't remember if it's the CPU or the GPU, but there's an X bracket on it that holds a piece in that when it heats up way too high, the bracket will bend itself because of the heat and will slightly release what it's holding down, and that's what causes the error. And you can replace that X bracket with just a couple screws, with a couple machine screws, and you're fine. That is the most common fix, but that's only works on like a third of the 360s. And then if you have one of the other 2/3, you got another 7 issues that you have to troubleshoot, and it might be more than one of them is the issue.
No, good.
I've another thing to say about this, but do you guys have anything else to talk about on this?
No, I much like Brian pretty much dodged. I never, out of the 2 systems I owned, had a red ring. I didn't have to deal with that, so I was rewarded, I guess, by Soul Calibur 4 coming out like later in the life cycle of the 360, and I guess more so rewarded that Soul Calibur 3 didn't release late enough that it started out in the next console gen.
Yeah, you and I got lucky in that, you know, we got our 360s late in the life cycle, and so we dodged all of this.
I was gonna say, I very specifically had to deal with this because I got my 360 by fixing a red ring of death. I will say, and this is the main reason I wanted to bring this up, Microsoft fucked up a lot getting it to this point. Between their design, the issues in the factory that led to poor yields, and then ultimately releasing consoles that were out of spec to the public. But they have one of the best stories in marketing, where they basically went, we did this, we are destroying our brand. What are we going to do? We're gonna fucking replace them. All of them. And it cost them $1.15 billion to pledge to replace all of those consoles that got the red ring of death. They expanded the warranty by 3 years, and they replaced everything. They paid for the shipping. They paid for everything. And it is one of those things where you never see a company do this. And the fact that they did this, I give a whole lot of credit for how people view the Xbox brand right now. Because I feel like if they didn't do this at the time, Xbox would be a crater right now.
Oh, they wouldn't even... They'd be like Sega. They wouldn't be a hardware developer anymore. Like, they would have been losing so much money, especially considering that, you know, like we were saying earlier, so much of the great games on the system or like multi-platform games that just are the best version of it is on the Xbox 360 system, and there's no real argument against that. So like it'd be so devastating if like imagine how much more successful the Wii would have been if Xbox 360 hadn't had this track where they replace everything and take the hit. Where they just say like, oh, we'll give you your money back.
Yeah, or store credit.
Yeah.
Maybe
or just be like, oh, you're outside of warranty. Oh well.
Yeah.
Sounds like it sucks to be you, and then make you buy another one. They would be out of business. They would be the other Sega. We would take.
On the other hand. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say it would be like Sega and Microsoft would be known as like the two modern generation gaming companies that did such a poor job that they actually pushed themselves out of the market.
I was going to say, on the other hand, I will go, the fact that they had this issue, they were able to show that regardless of the money spent, that they would stand by their products and they would stand by their fans. And I believe this is part of why Xbox has one of the more loyal fan bases in video games. I
would agree. And, like the fact that Microsoft went out of their way to make this right, because it was shaping up to be a PR disaster. So yes, well done to them for making it right.
And I think there's really another part of it that I don't really hear a lot of people talk about, but this failure kept Sony from cratering. Because imagine a world where Microsoft didn't make this mistake and the 360 comes out and there's no red ring, there's no meme, and it's just definitively the better system from the jump, and then there's no lull point where you have like a 2-year window for Sony to kind of catch up, because everybody's like, should I buy one, should I not, or you get one and it screws up and you're like, oh, do I really want to go through replacing it? If I'm just gonna have to deal with this again, maybe I should just get a PlayStation 3. Instead, imagine that scenario where it's just like, oh, I've got my 360 and it's great, and I have my Wii and that's great, and I see no need to get a PlayStation 3. And then the PlayStation 3 sales just completely die off because all it is a Blu-ray player. And at that point, unlike the PS2 being a DVD player, not everyone was on board with the Blu-ray yet. It was going to be a while before Blu-ray definitively established itself as the next generation of disc media.
Yes.
So without that, we might be living in a world where HD DVD is the actual format of current use for physical media. Well, whatever's left of physical media at this point, but
no, like, agreed. It's just like that
like, those red rings save Sony from possibly being pushed out of the market between Sony's failures with the handheld market at the time and then having the PS3 be an extremely slow start.
Yeah.
Like they could have lost so much money that they might have been like, you know what? We'll just make Blu-ray drives and we'll move on.
Yeah, like
if it wasn't for the Red Ring of Death, like, I guess something we haven't really touched on. The 360 was incredible, like, early on. The PS3 outsold it, not just the Wii.
Yes.
And that's mainly because of the second half of its lifespan.
Yep.
And I feel like a huge chunk of that is because of how Microsoft dropped the ball with the Red Ring of Death.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, like, you're in a... And also, to further add, like, Sony's initial struggles went on for those several years, like between a $600 price point. If you weren't one of the lucky people who could afford those early 360s that still had the just about full backwards compatibility before Sony very quickly took that away.
And just the never-ending string of different versions of the console. There's like, what, 8 different releases of the PS3 in terms of like hardware changes? It's crazy. You can't even keep track. It's like, which one should I get? Like, I remember thinking about getting one when I could afford it, later on, and it was just like, I was like, what version should I even get? Do I want to get one that's not backwards compatible because it has more space or whatever? And like, how much space do I really need? Because I have all these other Xbox games that I'd rather play it on. And, you know, I obviously ended up not getting one. And I ended up having, eventually my brother gave me his when he was done with gaming. And I, to this day, still don't even have a single PS3 game. I traded in all the ones he gave me that I inherited because they're all just like slop. They're all slop. It was funny.
Like, if we could have been in a situation where, you know, like Sony fucked up, but then Microsoft made a big fuck up, and we could have been living in we could exactly be living in an era where, you know, either Sony or Microsoft would have been the next Sega, and meanwhile Nintendo's just like, yep, we're still here.
Nintendo only has its most successful generation of all time between the DS and the Wii.
Yep.
Like the amount of sales they like, the it prints money meme is one of the most established and classic Nintendo memes because it's just so true.
That generation is kind of insane though, because the Wii sold 101 million, PS3 sold 87, and Xbox 360 sold 84. That makes them the 7th, 8th, and 9th best-selling consoles of all time in a row. No other generation is like that, where they're all clustered so closely and so high together.
Right, and then add in all the DS sales and then all the Sony handheld sales. I don't remember the timing on those in terms of release and all that, so which generation they are from. I think that was the Vita era for Sony.
I'll say DS would have been 2004, which would have been right before the 360. Because I got the page up with all the consoles. Let me take a look down at the PSP. Oh, there we are. 2004 as well.
Okay, so
right
it was same time. LOL. Nice decision there.
Yep. Beautiful.
And it's only a couple steps below the 360. The PSP sold 80 million as opposed to the 84 of the 360. Like, that generation.
Yeah, and then the DS is like one of the top 3 selling units all time.
It's number 2. It looks like it's about to get knocked out by the original, by the Switch 1. But we'll see if it can do that before Switch 2 comes out.
I think it passed it already. That might be an older, because I remember
an older list.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there are conversations now about Switch passing
the PS2.
PS2, and like the reason why they delayed the release of the Switch 2 was because they wanted to give the Switch 1 a chance to take the #1 spot.
But I mean, this generation, most generations have one console that runs away with everything, and then you have a conversation between number 2 and number 3. This generation, it was kind of the same thing where the Wii kind of ran away with it, but all 3 of them in any other generation could have been the top console.
Yeah.
They are among the best selling of all time, all of them together. It was crazy. I would honestly say this was probably one of the heights of gaming hitting the mainstream and becoming what we know it as today.
Yeah, I think we're gonna look back at the Super Nintendo to this era as kind of the golden era, quote unquote, of video gaming, where things are starting to get to a point where the capitalism is ruining the industry, and it's really hard to see a successful gaming model going forward if things continue down the path that we're going down. And then obviously before the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis era, it was just kind of still a little too young, and then there was the crash and all that stuff.
Yes, and then the capitalism ruining gaming. Foreshadowing future episode. But no, that was just a crazy era, and also keeping in mind, that era lasted a long time. Like, the 360 came out in November of 2005, and the last Microsoft stopped production on the 360 in April of 2016. So you got almost 11 years.
One of the longest generations we've ever had. I think the second longest, I think.
Yeah, like that generation was just once Sony and Microsoft found their stride, it was just like it took them a while. Nintendo was leaving them in the dust, but then once they hit their stride, we got a really, really great. We got a really, by the end of it, a really, really great generation. Like, it's rare where I, at some point, owned all three of those systems. Like, at one point, I had a Wii, a PS3, and a 360 at the same time. That never happens. But that just, to back to both of your points, just a testament to how good that generation was. But, you were talking, even with the Red Ring of Death, and you've mentioned Microsoft, Microsoft could have wound up being in second place in that generation, but as we have hinted, and I think what Spencer is going to talk more about is where Microsoft dropping the ball late in its cycle. So I'll segue to you, good sir.
It's kind of interesting to see, and it's not really just the 360, it's the PS3 as well, but because the PS3's sales are so poor in the beginning, it's hard to correlate the same because you aren't seeing the sales numbers kind of match one to one. But the first half, I would say, of the generation as a whole for third-party games is just so much stronger, and kind of wraps up with Red Dead Redemption 1 coming out in 2010 and like just kind of blowing the industry wide open. And it seems like everything after that kind of trickles off and it becomes less and less good. You talk about main franchise games, obviously Red Dead, and we talked about that, and Dragon Age Origins comes out, and that's like the new Western RPG that's like the super hot thing that everybody loves, and eventually that franchise started to taper off, and I don't think it really ever reached that same peak that the first game got to in terms of like overall popularity. You have all the Gears games. Those all came out relatively early in the cycle. Gears 3 coming last and kind of extending its lifespan with the online capabilities that were available at that time. But you get to a point where
Gears was a goddamn phenomenon at the time.
Yeah, no, that was a system seller. That was I'm not, it's kind of a subjective thing to define, but I feel like Gears was the 360 system seller almost as much, if not equal to Halo.
Or Mass Effect.
Those are the two games you're getting it for. Yes, but I think that because it's a RPG, it's more niche than a shooter. Like, I think shooters are a little more ranged popularity-wise between, like, capital G gamers, casual gamers, in and out people who like don't always game but like play something when everybody's talking about it.
Fair enough.
Kind of thing.
Me who doesn't play them at all.
Yeah, I mean, Spencer, you could put BioShock in that list as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say you've got BioShock. Alan Wake starts out and is like, now it's so much bigger, but like that first game really showed us something from Remedy that kind of snowballed into all of the Remedy games, going from Alan Wake as like a really important game in that whole development company. Really, that could be its own episode. And then there's one.
I will talk about Remedy as much as you want. Yeah.
There's one sleeper hit that was not exclusive to, but where I played it on was the 360. Alice Madness Returns is a platformer, like action platformer, where it's a very dark take on the Alice in Wonderland story, this takes place after the events of the first book, so it's kind of a sequel, so to speak. There is a previous game that it is a straight-up sequel to, but in terms of like the original stories that are everything's based off of, this is a sequel in that sense as well. It's not like a retelling of the original product.
Is that based off of American McGee's Alice?
Yes, that's the sequel.
Oh,
this
okay.
is a direct sequel to that one, which was a PC only release. If I remember correctly, that was PC only.
I adored its style.
Yes, it's got that like not like knockoff Tim Burton, but like Tim Burton's like esque kind of look to it. It's a little cleaner. There's probably a better comparison 1-to-1, but it's got that very just like gothic style character design, and the whole environment's very I call it like Dickens era London kind of look to it, where everything's kind of dingy and everyone's even the like rich people look kind of like less dapper than they should, and everything's got a little bit of a like not greasy pull to it, but like just like gooiness to it. It's a very visually appealing game, and it has a very good story. That
You can get no argument from me that I adore both the original and its sequel. Like, I really, really wish we could have ended up getting a trilogy there.
it plays a lot like God of War.
Yeah.
That would be like my 1-to-1. So like if you like the kind of early God of War gameplay, like PS2 era God of War games, it's got a lot of that kind of gameplay to it, but it's a little, it's more fantasy than it is reality in terms of like the violence and the gore and all that stuff. Then there's this year that starts in like 2013, 2014, where for me personally, this gets me completely out of console gaming for an entire generation. But these three games came out in about an 18-month period. Resident Evil 6, Soul Calibur 5, and Gears of War Judgment. These are all three like staple franchises that like, sell dozens of millions of copies each, and just like when they come out, you just assume that they're going to do well. But they all tried so hard to do things differently than its predecessor and establish a new like platform to work from to make more games, and they all fell so hard on their face. I'm sure you guys aren't familiar with all three because they don't really dip into each of your tastes as much as mine. But I know for a fact that you guys are aware of the Resident Evil 6 part of it at the very least.
A little bit.
Oh, it hurt me.
Be careful, Brian's having PTSD flashbacks.
It hurts.
Apply that. Obviously, it's not like 1-to-1 gameplay application, but apply that like transition from like I know that RE4 is like I'm familiar with the Soul Calibur debacle. The only one of the three I'm not familiar with is the Gears of, because I'm not a shooting person, so I've never followed the franchise. Not pew-pewing. Got it.
No pew-pewing.
But yeah, so Soul Calibur 5 was one of those fighting game reboots the whole world kind of thing. And this was like a time jump, so they jumped forward a like generation. So a bunch of characters, their fighting styles remain the same, but they moved into a new character where it was like, oh, this is the kid of so-and-so, or like this guy is the mentor of so-and-so, or whatever. And they tried very hard to replicate the Street Fighter V model in terms of like the UI and the structure of how the game plays, outside of the fact that it's a 3D fighter versus Street Fighter, which is a 2D fighter. And it just didn't work, and nobody liked it, and it was so unpopular that in Soul Calibur 6 they actually reverted back to the original timeline and just ignored everything in the previous game. It's like how bad of a mistake they made with that.
For me, it was the fact that they gutted the story mode.
Yeah, exactly, because they wanted to establish all these new characters. They didn't really have the same like thickness of gameplay that you got out of a Soul Calibur game that was previously established. is so much more than just an arcade game, which is like, a lot of fighting games are just arcade mode where you're just like, you fight, and you get to the final boss and you win, and that's the credits to your roll. Like, Soul Calibur is so far beyond that, and that was one of the reasons why I really loved the game, is why it's such a popular niche fighting title. And just see that part of it just get completely decimated. It was just like so disappointing.
I as I've mentioned before, I almost never play multiplayer games, the only exception being the 1 or 2 MMOs I've ever touched. Fighting games, I'm not getting into for the multiplayer playing with other people aspect. For me, because I can enjoy fighting games, but it's gotta have a strong story mode, because that's what I'm here for. And that's one thing I loved about Soul Calibur, was it always had a strong story mode. And I loved the characters, I loved the setup, like I loved all of it. And then 5 just kind of ruined everything that I enjoyed about the series.
Yep, really.
And by the way, I haven't come back to Soul Calibur since. I know that 6 is supposed to be better. I know there's ones that five ended my interest in the franchise.
Totally fair. I mean, honestly, the only reason I got 6 was because it was like on 50% stale on Steam. And I was like, all right, well, oh well.
All right. Is this gonna hurt?
It's honestly, it's fun. I would say it's about as good as 4 was, where like I hold like 2 and 3 as like the highest in the series, and then 4 and 6 are like the next notch down, where they're like really good, but I think 2 and 3 have a little bit better
that's what
options. But not to get too deep into the Soul Calibur lore, because I still want to talk about how awful Gears of War Judgment was. So
go ahead.
Just before you go on, just wanted to say Soul Calibur 2 for me. Like,
yeah,
always.
That's general. That's the general consensus. 3 has got some really cool options in terms of character creation and like a story mode around the character you create, and has some other iconic characters that are introduced. But yes, most people say 2.
I will never get rid of my copy of 2, because my copy of 2 is the GameCube copy of 2.
Yeah, is playing the only game you'll ever get to play as an actual sword fighter Link, and not just the spammy nonsense that Smash Brothers is.
Yep. Anyway, 2 Gears.
So Gears of War Judgment is a prequel that follows Baird while this is like overall lore is a little bit required here. So E-Day is the day that all the locusts emerge from the ground and start the whole war up. And the COG soldiers is like something that's established before that. So it's not like the COG are created to fight the locusts. The COG is like the military of whatever the original trilogy doesn't go super deep into like regions and countries and all that stuff, because, they killed everybody off before that, so it's not really necessary to the plot. So they're basically an established military of some size, whether it's the whole world, the whole country, whatever. And Baird is on trial for, he's for those of you unaware of Baird's character, he's a smart ass Ryan Reynolds-esque kind of attitude that is a tech guy, so he can fix pretty much anything. He would be the equivalent of an engineer, basically. So he's the lead character in this one, when in the previous 3 games he was just like a side character that you never had real physical control over. And him as the lead, much like most Ryan Reynolds movies with him as the lead kind of go, you get kind of sick of him about 2 to 3 hours into the game.
By the way, I just looked up, because I have no familiarity with this. I have a list of the best-selling 360 video games, anything that sold over 1 million units. And it's not even on the list, so I had to look up how much it made. It sold less than Viva Pinata.
Yeah. There you go. And then tell me, why don't you drop the Gears 3 sales numbers, since that was the previous title.
It sold 3 million, Gears 3 sold 3 million, and Gears 1 and 2 each sold 5 million.
There you go. Like 500% drop in sales. That's how bad that game was.
Yep.
So those 3 titles came out, and I think that it's just an overall summary of where the gaming industry went from that point forward, and how there is like I can't speak from experience because I literally didn't own any of those next gen systems between Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and Wii U, but I feel like that era is kind of maligned, where there are obviously good titles and stuff, and then like the Souls games really started to take a hold in that era, and you have like Last of Us and stuff like that. There's obviously good games, but like I think overall as like a general era, a lot of people are not going to be holding that era as high of regard. And that started in these kind of 2 years after
toward the end.
Yeah, towards the end, where everybody were like, you know, both systems tried to focus hardware wise on the motion control, and that kind of stagnated development of other better titles and whatnot. And then, you know, it took some time for the industry to recover.
Was Gears of War, was Judgment an actual core Gears of War title, or was it a spin-off?
No, because it's a prequel. It's considered a prequel because it takes place before the events of Gears of War 1.
No, I get that. I'm just saying, like, is it considered part of the main series, or is it considered a spin-off title?
I don't think it's considered a spin-off, but it might be. I don't know, like, spin-off is a tough, like, I think of spin-off differently when you're talking about a game and TV, and like I think that if it was like a TV story, it'd be a spin-off, but I think as a game, the gameplay's too similar to regular Gears to really be like, to me it's like Gears of War 3.5,
which is fine. I'm just trying to figure out the way to judge it, because
I understand what you're saying. I think it's a little difficult a lot of the time to really definitively say one way or the other, but I think this is close enough to it's not as long as any of the other 3 Gears games. It has it has like the online stuff and all that, but it wasn't as well maintained at that point. I feel like obviously the sales showed that it wasn't as popular, because it certainly had the ability to be played online, like you play Gears 3 online.
I also didn't expect, looking at the best-selling list, I didn't expect Minecraft to be the number 3 best-selling Xbox 360 title.
I mean, Minecraft it's one
I should have.
Yeah, you really should have. But some of the more memorable games. I think I would be remiss in case Wyatt over at Sprites and Dice is listening to this.
Hello.
Hi. I would be remiss if I did not mention probably one of his favorites that started off again as an Xbox Live arcade title, State of Decay.
Oh yeah, sure. Some of the live titles that I played as well, a lot of Plants vs. Zombies. That was really good. I came into Super Meat Boy a little bit later, like after the 360's life cycle, but that was a very popular title as well back in the day.
Yeah, the indie studio The Behemoth, which came out, which put, my first game of theirs was Battle Block Theater, but also Alien Hominid was up there, Castle Crashers.
Ooh, Geometry Wars. Yep, I knew I was forgetting something.
Yes, so
Geometry Wars involved as well.
I played another game that was very heavily inspired by literature, specifically Chinese literature. The game is called Enslaved Odyssey to the West, which is a loose adaptation of the 16th century Chinese story Journey to the West. So you play as a character named Monkey, who is voiced by Andy Serkis.
Yeah, it's the prequel to Black Myth Wukong, right?
That's...
Ooh. Terrible segue, but Mega Man 9 and 10 were both released on that as well, which they hold up. They are just as good as any of the other like NES and SNES era traditional Mega Man's titles.
Yeah, I agree.
If that style doesn't, understandably, like 9 and 10 titles is a lot, and that might turn some people off. But if you like that formula of gameplay, those are good. On the opposite end, Sonic 4
Yeah.
not really as good.
Not quite.
Yeah. You know.
I was gonna say, as the designated Sonic fan on this podcast, fuck that game. It was not meant to be Sonic 4. It was developed as a goddamn mobile title, and then they decided they needed something for the anniversary, so they slapped 4 on it and tried to sell it as a primary release without actually doing anything meaningful to change it.
Like,
we should have done that for the DLC restart. Just slap the 4 on it. DLC is dead.
Yeah, I mean, it is episodic, but like, you know, also just and other games that I played on it. You know, we were talking. You know, we spent a good chunk of the first half talking about the Kinect, but some of the other peripherals. I mean, Rock Band. You could hook up a freaking guitar, a drum set, and a mic to the damn 360. Like, I remember, you know, going to, you know, hanging out with friends at parties, you know, in my 20s, my early 20s, and we'd be playing Rock Band for hours. Like, you know.
I this is outside of your guys' scope, but working at GameStop, I was grossly aware of all the peripherals that came out in that era thanks to the Wii, but it definitely seeped its way into the other 2 markets, and one of the ones that always grabbed me was the Big Buck Hunter Cabela games that always came with the, like, arcade shooter gun came with the actual arcade machine, and it's just this giant freaking gun box, and it's like bright orange, and it's so ugly, and I'm just like, no actual person who plays this game wants this specific controller.
So do keep in mind, I didn't work in a game store. I worked in Walmart.
Yes,
we sold that.
Yes,
we absolutely sold that.
Yes, we did. Oh my god, And
by the way, we were sitting on that for over a decade in our back room. I'm pretty sure that, alongside Tabula Rasa, were things I had to convince District to let us throw away. With Tabula Rasa, my argument being, this is an MMORPG that doesn't have servers anymore. We cannot sell this to a human being.
Yeah.
Other,
like, what was it? What other I remember? The Orange Box. Portal. Or, Portal 2 specifically.
Yes.
Which, I'm not a fan of puzzle games, but both Portal games really, you know, grabbed me for...
I realized that.
Not a huge fan of puzzle games.
I would have thought you had been super into puzzle games. That's interesting.
Yeah. They don't cross my radar very often.
The only other games I really had a lot of time with on the 360, Rainbow Six had a spin-off series where you played as like a SWAT team, basically, and you would be the leader of the SWAT team, and you could control your team, not directly like how
Vegas?
Yes, yep, that's a if you're into a more tactical, like less, you know, like action fast movement kind of shooter, that's a really interesting, fun game to try out. But obviously realistic shooters aren't for everybody, so that, you know, might not be your cup of tea. But the basic premise is you're a SWAT team working in Las Vegas, and you know, it's a Tom Clancy game, so, you know, there's always some like twist upon a twist with a twist in the background and a guy in the distance staring with binoculars doing a twist of his own. So it's not the greatest story of all time, but it's a fun play, and I recommend it if that's your thing.
And was there a South Park game? A South Park game that came out in that generation? Was it the Stick of Truth?
I was gonna say, I think Stick of Truth was that generation, but it was PS3, I think. Okay. I don't think it came to the 360. I'll look it up right now.
All right. And, you know, something we haven't even touched on was like the X.
No, it did come to the 360.
Okay.
I think it released on the PS3 first, and then came to the 360. Because I think I remember it just being PS3 when it first came out. Though somebody in the comments can tell me I'm wrong, and I probably am, but that's what I think I remember.
And, you know, this wasn't a selling point for the 360 because they didn't really hype it up the way Sony did initially for their PS3, but there was some backwards compatibility for the 360. I think it was something on the order of like half their library in the end, like half the Xbox library.
The problem with Xbox's backwards compatibility is it's gradual, because they're basically doing emulation for the way theirs works.
Yep.
As opposed to PlayStation, who for the longest time just had the chips for both in their systems.
Yes.
Which was crazy expensive, but it meant basically perfect compatibility. With Xbox, it's always been, well, we're emulating it and we're doing it on a game-by-game basis, so we're slowly adding to it. But it means that right now, like, because they've been able to keep that emulation between it, the current Xbox has not perfect compatibility, but plays basically everything you would want to play from all the generations.
Yes.
Which is just aces. Like, that is the one thing I will say, Microsoft, well done. Please just take all of the take your flowers, get a little clap.
Yep.
We appreciate a backwards compatible queen in this household.
Yes, we do. We stan. So I guess that will segue into some closing as we start to wind down here. So we had this groundbreaking system that released 20 years ago, and so we've talked about it at length, but its legacy, 20 years since its release, we see the effects that it has had on the industry now. Like we mentioned how it set the stage for digital distribution becoming the norm, online multiplayer becoming the norm. Xbox Live doesn't really exist anymore, but that has branched into Game Pass.
I was going to say another thing we didn't really even touch on is with this also gave the opportunity for DLC being things that are available as a purchase rather than having to buy a whole new release of the game to get extra content.
Yes. Right in there, again with that, those early halcyon days of digital distribution before it got abused to death.
Oh, Undead Nightmare. Oh, it's like the best DLC ever. Why can't we do stuff like that anymore? So rough.
And
that's Red Dead, right?
Yeah, just real quick, it was a DLC release of like a non-canonical storyline where the whole area that the game takes place in. So the same map, everybody's infected as zombies except for like John Marston, the main character, and then like a handful of other people, including his family. And it's basically like a short quest line where you are trying to find the cure. And it's very silly and like, way less serious than the main story. It's just it's probably one of the better zombie games in my opinion, just from how it plays and just like the overall tone of it. But
I was gonna say, I've heard it's very good. My personal favorite DLC of all time is the Resident Evil 7 DLC, where you play the swamp grandpa going around suplexing zombies and uppercutting them after a super serious game where now you're just kicking the shit out of them like you're a pro wrestler.
Grandpa Chuck Norris lost in the woods.
I think, Brian, I sent you a message going, every Resident Evil after this needs to have a DLC where I just get to go around kicking the shit out of the zombies with wrestling moves.
There you go.
I mean, RE4 Remake does that by having Ada using her grapple gun as a weapon instead of just like a cutscene transportation device.
And I think Leon can still suplex in the remake, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so like the Xbox 360's legacy, like it did a lot of things that have carried over into gaming today. I mentioned right near the beginning, like, so it wasn't too long after my ownership of a 360 that I started playing games on PC. And to this day, my standard PC gaming controller because I can't, PC and mouse, I can't. I'm going to have that console base until I die. But the Xbox 360 controller has been the standard. Most games that you buy on PC use the Xbox 360 controller as its base, as its default control scheme. And like, that was one of those things where like Microsoft kind of really hit it out of the park for it to still be the standard controller for PC games 20 years later.
Well, I mean, it's because they programmed it directly into Windows. They made it easier. Any group that wants to program for the PS5 kind of has to do the work themselves every single for the game. They can't just easily jack into what Microsoft has already programmed into the system. Like they like, don't get me wrong, I agree with you, and I use an Xbox One controller as my PC controller because it's just the best for it. But part of the reason for that is because Microsoft has gone out of their way to make it that by programming it specifically into Windows and not just a generic controller the way it used to be.
Yes,
and that's the choice they made.
Yeah, like it's like because the 360 was made, you know, with a sort of PC gaming mindset in mind, a lot of that has carried over into gaming now. Like the melding of console and PC, specifically as far as Microsoft is concerned, is, you know, there really is not much of a line. I mean, especially now with the current current Xbox is basically a PC.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is because, like, right around when they started doing that was when they implemented Game Passes.
Yeah.
And as, like, a PC option. And you could see, like, they want to just streamline that whole process now and make they want to make PC their console. And just kind of, you know... I genuinely don't know why they would produce another console after this generation. It just doesn't seem like it makes any sense anymore for Xbox to continue down this path.
Yeah, I mean,
with what their marketing plan is.
I mean, it seriously looks like Xbox is planning on slowly meandering their way out of the console market and trying to make it as Game Pass and finding a foothold in PC, which I don't know how well that's going to work for them.
Yeah, I mean, one of, you know, because of the groundwork they laid with the 360, it, you know, we do start seeing a bit more of that, that sort of like the negative side of that double-edged sword that Spencer used in the first half, where we went from that to we are careening into games as a service. I mean, this has been in the works for years, but like the 360, I feel kind of really started to jumpstart that.
Totally.
I mean, I will say it is no secret that Xbox is my least favorite of the three main console manufacturers. The Microsoft is currently my least favorite of the three main console manufacturers. I absolutely find value in Xbox. There's a reason I'm on this podcast. But I generally find more value in Sony and Nintendo. But if Xbox does end up going the way of Sega, I think that would be such a goddamn loss for the industry. Like, there is no good coming out of that. And I as much as I kind of see the writing on the wall there from the different things they've said and done, I hope I'm wrong, because I don't think that's going to do anything good for the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I have a PS5 because of Spider-Man. That's they made that decision very easy for me, because I was thinking about it for a while, which one I was going to get, but just Spider-Man's the tiebreaker.
The reason we have one is for two things very specifically. One was for Final Fantasy VII Intergrade, because that was a PS5 exclusive. But the first game, the reason we got it specifically, we knew we were going to have to get it for Intergrade eventually, was for Oddworld Soulstorm for Deja. Oddworld is her childhood game.
Yep. But, you know, 20 years. It left its mark, and it's definitely Microsoft. Definitely, I think overall, this even though it started veering south toward the end of its life cycle. They definitely, I think, hit it out of the park on their second attempt. They learned from the original Xbox mostly, and definitely came out with a very, very strong second effort, and we still see it today. I mean, I do not know how true this is, according to Lord Wikipedia, but apparently there is still, it's not as big as it once was, but something on the order of like 15% of gamers still are still, plugged in with their 360s. Like, that is still, like, if not for still playing games, but all just like as a media center.
Not surprised. Like, it became such a big... I mean, that's one thing we never even touched on in this, and I don't think there's time now, but, like, the whole push for it being the media center of your house, how they were really trying to push the 360 beyond just playing games.
That said, I don't know too many people who actually use it as a media center, but, I'm sure they exist, because Sony tried to do the same thing. But do any of you...
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, do any of you have some last thoughts before we put this to bed?
No, I think I'm good.
I think everyone should go play Red Dead Redemption.
Right now.
Like right now.
Right now, right this second.
Get on a horse and just horse around for a while.
Just yeehaw around.
I guess I'll go. I would recommend playing the number 34 best-selling Xbox 360 game of all time, Final Fantasy 13.
Why? Why are you like this? Why are you like this?
I mean, if I want to say why am I out like this, I can go, it outsold Red Dead Redemption.
Who hurt you?
Final Fantasy fans are special people, okay?
Yes, I say that as one. But who hurt you, Ronnie? Bringing up Final Fantasy 13. All right.
V can't hurt me anymore. I built a shield against them due to their RE4 takes. So I'm vaccinated against crazy V takes.
All right. So if any of you out there have any opinions or thoughts on this episode or any other episode of DLC, or want to be in on an episode or suggest ideas, again, you can all find it on our website, dlcpodcast.com, and every episode can be found there, as well as iTunes / Apple Podcasts, as well as Spotify. So all it remains for me to do is to thank Veronica and Spencer for being on this episode. And until we see you guys again, have a good one, and we'll see you next time.